Good evening, and welcome to our Founders Day celebration. I'm Nancy Gosher Thomas. I'm the president of the Providence Art Club. May 11th, 1880, it was written about the first exhibition. The Providence Art Club held its first general meeting last evening at the studio in Wayland Building by invitation of the ladies who gathered there to pursue the study of art. The response to the invitation was so general and enthusiastic that there could be no doubt as to the interest felt in this movement. The harmonious impulses which brought the company together seemed in unison with the soft light of the multitude of waxen tapers that illuminated the scene. The fragrance of flowers and the presence of the fair hostesses themselves lent a charm to the auspicious opening, which will long be remembered. An address by the President, Mr. Lincoln, was followed by the reading of the Constitution, and during the recess allowed for signing for membership. The list speedily mounted to more than 100 names. The Art Club accordingly may now be considered as successfully inaugurated, and we shall hopefully await the results of this association, end quote. And so we celebrate the 16 original signers of the compact. Our founders were 12 artists, 4 non-artists, 10 men, and 6 women. Catherine H. Austin, Edward M. Bannister, Frederick S. Batchelor, Etta Belcher, Charles E. Carpenter, Harriet B. Chase, Lottie F. Daly, Henry Field, Robert E. Hallworth, James Sullivan Lincoln, Rosa F. Peckham, George M. Porter, Imrich Rhine, Charles Walter Stetson, Eleanor W. Talbot, and George W. Whitaker. On February 19th, 2015, under then President David D. Petrillo, we began a new tradition by celebrating Founders Day. In the Maxwell Mays Gallery, over 100 glasses were raised to a rousing cheers to honor our founders. The silhouette cocktail, designed especially for the event, was an instant hit. Dan Meshnig and Chris Ratcliffe told a few stories about the 16 women and men who gathered on February 19, 1880 to form our club. A resounding voice vote favored making Founders Day an annual event. February 21st, 2020, the 6th annual Founders Day celebration kicked off the 140th anniversary celebration with Eleanor Talbot Meets the Press as Silhouettes Dance. A mini play starring Audrey Monahan as founder Eleanor Talbot and Tom Monahan as a reporter also featured a show by puppeteer Dan Butterworth. Tonight, you will hear about the Florence B. Kane Society by Gail Ginnity, Chair of Development. You will also hear from former treasurer Ted Mattis, who will speak about 3 of PAC's Legacy Society members, including the most recent Dr. Esparza, with a moving story of his gift to the Providence Art Club. You will also hear from Elise Francesca, who will share some history of Edward Bannister prior to introducing Mr. Gage Prentice, sculptor of the Edward Bannister bust, the unveiling of the gift that now resides in the Founders Room. There will be a question and answer period, at which time Mr. Prentice will take questions from the audience through the chat function of Zoom. Once the Q&A has concluded, please have your cocktails ready as we toast the founders of the Providence Art Club. I hope you enjoyed tonight's program, and now I will turn it over to Development Chair Gail Ginnity.
Thank you, Nancy. As we celebrate and remember our founders tonight, we are also celebrating the spirit of philanthropy that has been part of the art club culture since the beginning and continues to be today. Just this past year, 2020, one of our most challenging years for all organizations, including ours, there was an extraordinary number of voluntary gifts made by members, 191 to be exact, totaling almost $90,000. And this was in addition to the generous support of over 70% of our members to the Employee Holiday Fund, when I would guess many of you never even came to the club. So thank you, everybody, for that. So this slide that you see now gives you a sense for what members cared about and supported. So again, it does not include the employee fund. So the gifts are grouped into 5 different categories. And to start with are donations for operational purposes, really where most of the most immediate need always is. And so those 35 individual gifts, totaling almost $46,000, range from $50 to $10,000, including a number of gifts to make our outside experience much more pleasant, such as gifts for the fire pits, the patio heaters, and the outdoor lighting. And none of these items were in our budget this year. In the next category, the Debt Retirement Fund, 8 members gave a total of $6,000. And this fund was started over a year ago and will be used for paying off our renovation loan when the balance comes due. In the next category, Endowment, we had 15 members give gifts ranging from $10 to $25,000 in celebration of their birthdays. The board has designated that these Joan Bogosian-inspired birthday gifts be added to our endowment at the Rhode Island Foundation. This happens to be my favorite category. I enjoy the idea of writing a check on my birthday, knowing it will go toward the club's future sustainability. Next category, gifts were made in memory of one of our members that we lost this past year. And last, the last category, there were actually 130 individual gifts made to support the club's donation of lunches for our frontline hospital workers. So the Spirit of Philanthropy was with us in 2020, a very difficult year in so many ways. So thank you, everybody. But I'd also like to add and recognize that just being a loyal member is no less impactful. It's really what keeps the club going and covers the basics. So continuing to pay your dues, along with assessments and fees, signing up for classes, supporting the art of the takeout, and just hanging in as a member when your priorities might have been elsewhere this past year. We thank you. And I'd like to pass on a special expression of gratitude from both staff and the board. So to honor the long history of philanthropy at the club, the board thought it was time for some updates to highlight and recognize how important philanthropy has been to our organization. And these conversations started way before the pandemic. They've been going on for a while. And of course, to illustrate how really important this topic is, we even have a logo. So I think, Kathy, you're going to show that now, right? So thank you to Kathy Hodge for creating this for us. So those of you who ordered dinner tonight, you will notice that your cookie is decorated with this logo. But more importantly, a little over a year ago, the board established a development committee, and now our website has a support tab where members have a simple and easy way to donate to the club, both for needs now and in the future. And everyone feel free to contact any of the members of the development committee if you have any questions about those support pages. So since our beginning, our club has really been relying on generous members to fulfill the mission of the club, help it grow, cover the financial gaps when needed, so we can continue to keep our dues reasonable, and also provide for some of the nice enhancements we all enjoy. And the anonymous gift of this wonderful Bannister bus we'll hear about in a few minutes is a lovely example of member philanthropy. So a discussion about philanthropy would not be complete, of course, without including mention of our Legacy Society, which the board created sometime in the late 50s or 60s to recognize members who included the club in their estate plans. They realized that legacy gifts could have a powerful impact and also give folks who didn't necessarily have the resources during their lifetime an opportunity to support the club in a meaningful way once they were no longer here. So they decided to name our Legacy Society after Florence B. Kane, seen here, one of our most generous members who absolutely loved this club. When she passed away, she left a portion of her estate and many of her beautiful sculptures, one seen here, to the club. Her financial gift, which today, in today's dollars, is worth over 1.3 million. That, along with her artistic achievements, had a major beneficial impact on our club. So this is a picture of some more of her work, which you can find in Angels Lane. And there are also, we don't have a picture of it here, but there are also some metal plaques in the Fleur-de-Lis building, which depict political leaders sometime around World War II. This is a picture of Florence with the bust she created of President Eisenhower. And she actually presented this at the White House in June 1954, and a couple of years before her death at age 61. Amazingly, she overcame physical impediments and many family issues to become a nationally recognized sculptress. And as a child, she actually suffered from the same disease as Helen Keller, and it left her deaf and mute. And if you'd like to know more about Florence, her story is on our website under the support tab. So the last slide I'm going to speak to is a picture of the Legacy Society members that over the years have remembered the club in their estate plans. And based on our records, this list dates back to, as you can see, to 1914. And this list is actually in the current issue of our yearbook, if you want to go back and take a look at it. Now, I'd like to turn the program over to Ted Mattis, former treasurer and also former longtime board member, who will tell us, as Nancy mentioned, about some of these Legacy Society members, including the very first one and the most recent. So Ted, take it away.
Thank you, Gail. The list of members in the Florence B. Kane Society starts in 1914 with Isaac Bates, and over the next 100 plus years reads as a testimony to the many past members who made a difference by choosing to remember the Providence Art Club in their estate planning. Tonight, I'd like to talk a little about Mr. Bates, say a few words about Dana Rice, and give just a little further recognition to our most recent benefactor, Dr. Esparza. Dr. Alfredo Esparza passed away July 1st, 2018, at the age of 85. His very brief obituary in the Providence Journal read in part, Dr. Esparza was the chief of pathology at Rhode Island Hospital for many years. He was also an artist and a longtime member of the Providence Art Club. In the club's yearbook, he identified himself simply as doctor, artist. After his retirement, he joined the club and immersed himself into his artistic endeavors with the same unassuming devotion he gave to his medical career. In a parallel with Florence Kane, he had directed that the two primary beneficiaries of his estate were to be his church, in his case, the Cathedral of Saints Peter and Paul, and the Providence Art Club. Arguably, like Miss Kane, these were the places in which he found the comfort of purpose and community. Dr. Esparza had made no directives as to how the funds were to be used, and there were no policies in place as to how to allocate substantial gifts. The board apportioned the six-figure bequest towards several areas, including capital improvements and sustainability. The new classroom lighting, the Providence Art Club endowment at the Rhode Island Foundation, and the Mortgage Reduction Fund are examples of wish list ideas that were able to come to fruition thanks to the quiet planning and unexpected patronage of Alfredo Esparza, doctor, artist. Now, who is Dana Rice? Well, his legacy is better known in the boating world, where the Dana Rice Regatta is an annual event out on Narragansett Bay. But when Dana Rice died in 1980, he left a substantial bequest to the club with the directive that until the funds ran out, the art club would have an annual dinner for members with all costs paid for from the bequest. Now, understandably, the membership fully embraced the idea, and for nearly 30 years, Dana Rice Night was free to the members and always sold out, so to speak. And finally, Isaac Comstock Bates, or simply Bates, as his contemporaries called him. He was, without a doubt, the definitive patron of the arts. He bought and collected widely, with an emphasis on contemporary American paintings. Upon his death, his vast art collection, including his portrait by Frank Benson, shown here, was bequeathed to the RISD Museum and formed the foundation of their holdings of American paintings. From George Minor in the book Angel's Lane. Mr. Bates's devotion to the art club lasted up until his death in the winter of 1912-1913. He was a generous friend to the painters. He had a storeroom full of canvases, and he was constantly buying at the club's exhibitions, and his taste and judgment ranked as high as his loyalty to the artists. Bates and Burley were boon companions, and when automobiles came along in the early 1900s, they would explore the countryside in Bates's Packard. Burley would sketch, and Bates would just enjoy it. Mr. Burley once told of a story one afternoon out Smithfield way. They passed an old stone chimney standing alone in a cellar hole where an ancient farmhouse had burned or collapsed. The big kitchen fireplace had a huge brick oven, and Bates said it would be too bad to have that handsome old chimney pulled down. They stopped at the house nearby where the farmer now apparently lived, and Bates bought the chimney for $15 as long as it would stand. And I believe this painting by George Whitaker illustrates that very same chimney. Now, he was both a patron and a friend to Charles Walter Stetson and to Edward Michael Bannister. And it may in part explain why the unlikely 21-year-old Stetson and the possibly more unlikely Mr. Bannister came to be two of the club's 16 founders. And how fitting it is this Founders Day that we commemorate Edward Michael Bannister. And to speak about Mr. Bannister, I'd like to introduce the Chair of Marketing and Communications, Elise Francesca.
Thank you, Ted. Good evening, everyone. When we think of the things that have shaped us into who we are, who we become, we often immediately cite the culture, times, and events around us. Even more so during a defining year, such as 2020 and the aftermath. But perhaps it's the role of those whom we love that make the largest impact. Tonight, we gather virtually a year into a global pandemic, having lived with a lot of cultural, historic events that have occurred very quickly. On this night, we also happen to gather to celebrate a man whom we perhaps can all see ourselves in. But first, we must understand who Edward Bannister was. Can we relate to living in a post-Civil War America? Probably not. But we can certainly relate to a yearning for something more for ourselves. Being inspired by true love and art, we can relate to facing adversity at times and struggles. We can relate to seeking hope and refuge during dark times. We can feel lost and unseen. Edward Bannister was born in 1828 in St. Andrews, New Brunswick, and later moved to Boston as a young man. He worked as a hairdresser, working in one of the salons owned by a woman named Christiana Carteau. Carteau was an independent businesswoman with a Native American and African American heritage calling herself a hair doctress, a woman clearly ahead of her time as an entrepreneur. The pair got married, then moved to Providence after the Civil War. Actually, I'm sorry, I'm back over here. Okay, so Christiana opened another salon and encouraged her husband to quit his job and focus on his art. I would have made out very poorly if it not had been for her, Bannister said. My greatest success have come through her, either through her criticisms of my pictures or the advice she would give me in the matter of placing them in public. As much as tonight is an evening to celebrate one of our founders, Edward Bannister, it is also to honor the people in our lives like Christiana, who support and encourage us to live out our dreams. In 1876, Bannister entered Under the Oaks in the Philadelphia Centennial Competition. He was immediately met with, "What is that colored person in here for?" Bannister explained that he was inquiring about number 54 in the report Under the Oaks had received a prize. He exclaimed, "I painted that picture." It is said that the official apologized without hesitation. Success at the Philadelphia Centennial Exposition brought prosperity and a good life for he and his wife. Then moving to a home at 93 Benevolent Street. Christiana founded the Home for Aged and Colored Women, now Bannister Nursing Care Center here in Providence. Edward was one of the original founders of our club and an original board member of RISD. Bannister viewed art as a deeply spiritual activity. He passed away in 1901 and his work was rediscovered during the civil rights movement of the 1960s. Here we are, 50-something years later, living in a historical movement and moment, sitting in and tuning in, appearing in a club that this man and his wife helped bring to life. Bannister's story is a unique one, but also one we can find a piece of ourselves in a journey as artists, as patrons alike, supporting those things and people we believe in deeply. So I would like to now introduce, it's my pleasure actually to introduce Gage Prentice sculpture.
Come on in, watch your step. The Edward Bannister bust project came about really organically. I had just finished another very long and very huge portrait sculpture project, and my anonymous donor had been very adamant about wanting to do something else involving history and involving the art club and a wonderful artist that was very close to his heart. Wouldn't it be great if we could make a portrait of him to gift? So that's when the wheels really started turning, and I got to work researching him. There wasn't much out there, so I had to take what existed and then kind of reverse engineer him using what I knew about anatomy, what I could find online about averages, and then just try to get the general dimensions and anatomy correct. Once I had that bare bones foundation, then I just kept my eyes out for a model that kind of had the feeling of Bannister I was looking for. And I find this gentleman at my gym of all places. And with being able to take different photographs from different angles, I was able to fill in the blanks, and then from that foundation, push and pull and push and pull a lot to try to get the presence that I thought Bannister would have in the room. So I concentrated more on this in-life photo of him, which had his energy, his swagger, and just the charisma that he was so famous for with his friends. Step one is, with all the dimensions I've gotten, I cut out a silhouette from the front and the back and the side, and I put all those together on an armature. That armature I fill in with spray foam and then carve the spray foam into something resembling a skull. So once I've got the armature all finished and I start building out the sculpture, I use wax. Wax is an amazing material because it has a huge array of different textures. When you can start out, it could be a liquid, And you could use brushes and palette knives and just paint it on, building up as you go. From that, if you want to build faster, you could use different spatulas, all kinds of shapes. And you go in after you've given it a little time to cool, and you can get a pudding consistency, which smooths on beautifully for texture, sticks to itself. From there, it can get leather hard, which allows you to hand model with it like clay. And the more you use it, the harder it gets. As that cools, it can go all the way to a solid, like dark chocolate. And this, you can carve using any of these tools, usually for wood carving. So with the Bannister bust, I use a tool very much like this with a kind of soft chocolate texture to add and build all of these things, shaping them and scraping them out as I go. That gives it pretty smooth. So then I take a tool very much like this at all different shapes and sizes to scrape out negatives, bring things into block forms. After that, I take much smaller little scrapers to start getting details here and there. And then by the end, I've moved down to little ball bearings, picks, and whatnot to catch the light and kind of just harness it and make lots of little highlights to form the texture on the skin and in hair. Because as Alberto Giacometti believed, nobody is smooth, no one is static, everything is always moving in a portrait. So capture that kinetic energy with lots of texture and lines. And that's kind of how I live all of my sculpture life. So once the sculpture is finished, I bring it to the foundry to be cast in bronze. They take the sculpture and coat it with rubber to make a rubber mold. Once they have this whole thing, usually in sections, covered in a rubber mold, they can peel that mold off and make a duplicate sculpture using red casting wax. The red casting wax is slathered inside all throughout the entire surface to make a 1/4 inch thickness. Once they have the 1/4 inch thickness, they can shuck that out of the mold and add sprues so that the bronze and the pressure can be relieved when they pour bronze into it. They take the red wax duplicate they've made, coat it in several baths of ceramic slip until they form a shell. That ceramic shell gets put in a kiln and fired until it's solid, melting all of the wax out, leaving a negative for the bronze to enter. That shell is turned upside down, the bronze is heated, the bronze is poured in, about 80 to 100 pounds of it. This goes inside, fills from the top up, coming out through the sprues, and cools. Once it's cooled and there's no warping, they take hammers and all the way up to dental picks and remove with force and skill all of the ceramic shell that held its shape. After that, they turn it over, cut off the sprues, weld, grind, and sand until it is as close to the artist's vision as possible. Then they sandblast it to get the surface ready for adding patina. Once they choose a patina, that's usually lots of applied heat, acids, paintbrush, and then they wax it, and then it's finished.
Hi, I'm Nancy Gosher Thomas, and I'm here with sculptor Gage Prentice. We're here for the unveiling of the Edward Bannister's sculpture. And I just had a question for Gage that I wanted to ask. We had visited his studio and it was so wonderful. And I know that he had visited Mr. Bannister's gravesite. And I'd just like to ask, what was that like and what was the feeling you got once this sculpture was completed and you were able to visit the site? So I'm asking Gage this question.
I spent I had the honor and the pleasure to spend about 8 months consistently working on Bannister, feeling in his presence and just surrounded by his artwork from all the pictures that I had online to really get a feeling for him. And when I had finally wrapped up and drove the original wax to the foundry to be cast, it was completely out of my hands at that point. And there was a huge feeling of relief and pride and just thankfulness. And when I was finished, I felt like there was still something else to do. I didn't know what. But then I remembered that he was buried not far from where I lived. So I went to North Burial Ground, I visited him, and I was just taken aback by this gigantic stone with a beautiful bronze palette on it that his friends had erected for him in his honor. And I started to feel such a gratitude for being able to work on this project, especially seeing how much he was loved in his life and just how much he touched people with his work. So I just felt gratitude mostly.
Okay, so here we are, and we are going to unveil Mr. Bannister. Edward Bannister. I do want to take a minute to just thank our donor for this generous gift to the art club. This is an amazing gift that speaks to art history. As you know, Edward Bannister was a founder of the Providence Art Club. I do hope that you'll take the time to visit and see this amazing sculpture. Thank you.
Great. Yes, right.
Okay, so everyone, we're going to actually turn it over to some question and answers. So if you have any questions, Gage is here, obviously, and he would love to answer. I'm sure there's a lot of things we'd love to ask him tonight. So does anyone want to start? And you can send it directly to the chat that we have right now. So we'll take a look and see if there's any questions. Oops, let's see here. Okay. So actually, we do have some to start with. So Gage, can you tell us a little bit more about what kind of wax that you use and how much it weighs?
Sure. First of all, the weight, the piece itself is hollow, but it was a little thicker in spots than others. So it doesn't look as heavy as it is, but it's actually about 110 pounds of cast bronze. So quite a bit to lift to get up on that pedestal. The wax I use is kind of special. Most people just use something called brown microcrystalline wax. It's got a great texture. It's very easy to get most sculpture supply stores. But over the last 20 years, kind of like a good bread starter, I've been adding beeswax and red casting wax to it and working the same 50 pounds of wax for the last 22 years. So the wax that I'm using, I don't think you could humanly buy or get anywhere. So it's kind of a special wax I've been building with a texture and a color kind of all its own. But anyone who wants to start with wax, I highly recommend microcrystalline wax.
Okay. So we have another question. So how did you discover your passion for this particular art form?
Oh, for sculpture?
Mm-hmm.
As a kid, I used to make things out of my mashed potatoes and my baby food. And I've always loved thinking about something in my head and then trying to make something physical that would cast its own shadow and exist. So I've always had a big interest in it. And I always found working with 3D much easier than trying to create an illusion 2D with, drawing or painting. I think that's much, much more difficult. I've always been very physical and liked, bending things and hammering things and making things stand up. So I've always been interested. I just love making beautiful things.
Oh, that's wonderful. And another question we have is, what do you hope that people might think when seeing your piece 100 years from now, since we've been talking about so much history?
I would love for someone to be able to walk in the room with Bannister and feel just some echo of his presence in the room. That's the whole reason I do any kind of figurative work, is that when I'm long gone, even if there wasn't a name on the base, that you would feel that human connection. You would pick up on his nuance. You would pick up on just the light in his eyes and feel a connection with him forever. That's what I want, just a human connection.
Great. So next question, how many sculptures do you make in a year?
I'm a slow burn, I gotta say. If it's something substantial like Bannister, maybe I could do 2 if I really, really push. But normally my year is 1 large project and maybe a dozen very smaller ones. But no, I am not remarkably prolific. I really have to sit with things, and I make a lot of mistakes. So I just keep reworking the same piece until I get it done.
Okay. And what, I guess, most surprised you about Bannister as you continue to research his background and, just who he was and his art?
Well, in the very beginning, I kind of learned more about his wife, Christiana, than him. And he kind of came into focus as a painter and a founder of the art club. But I was really taken by his work more than him. And the more I thought about his work, the more I was curious about who he was. And what surprised me was just how just physical and powerful and popular he was. Just he was the kind of guy who had lived an amazing life without even picking up a paintbrush, in the Merchant Marines and moving here from Canada. And he would grab all of his gear and he would go out into the world to set up and paint. He would go to those locations and he would really experience all of the kind of the majesty and the presence of the landscapes he was trying to capture. And it's rare that I think of a painter being as formidable a force as like a sculptor or an athlete or something like that. He was just, I was surprised by how powerfully his presence came across through his work and the accounts of people who knew him.
Wonderful. I actually have a question here about the costume that he's wearing. How did you research that vest in particular? It's very authentic and
Well, I went back and forth on that quite a bit.
yeah.
Because I had never really imagined or really concentrated on the fact that back in that time, people dressed better to oil paint than I did at my own wedding. I mean, they would wear their tie, the cravat, their linen shirt, their vest. Then they would have a dress smock on top of that, and their dress shoes. I mean, they were set up like they were going to work at a bank, and it was just so impressive. And there weren't a lot of images of him, so I had to look up a lot of kind of generic images of people who were painting at the same time. And you just kept seeing this very traditional vest and cravat, almost uniform for painters. So originally I had all these ideas for very kind of over the top and decorative materials and things. But the more I thought about it and the more I worked on it, the more I just wanted to simplify and get just a nice feeling of texture, drapery, and keep it as traditional as possible.
Right. And what foundry do you use? Do you sculpt animals?
Oh, I'm sorry, did I miss
Foundry first.
Foundry first, and then do I
And
sculpt
animals.
Yes,
Yeah,
okay.
it's a two-part question.
The foundry I use for large works is Sincere Metalworks in Amesbury, Massachusetts. They're phenomenal. For smaller bronze works, I use Harrison Casting in Johnston, Rhode Island. They're amazing too. They do a lot of work with RISD. And yes, I do sculpt animals. I love sculpting animals. I have sculpted bronze cats. I'm working on a small tabletop bronze black lab right now, and lots of imaginary animals too. But yes, I love sculpting animals.
Okay, great. Let's see what else I have here. So where is this going to be displayed in the art club?
As far as I know, it's going to be in the main dining area near the double doors, or perhaps back where it'll get a lot of sun at the back window wall. But I am not 100% sure.
And how was the process for your wife and your partner during this? How was I guess how did this go?
Let me segue over to my wife.
Yeah, I was just going to say it's a kind of a nice segue since she's
Yes.
in the camera. So,
It was great. I love when Gage is working on a big project, especially the Bannisters. The Bannisters are a favorite area of study of mine, and so this gave me an opportunity to immerse myself even more in Edward and Christiana's life, and also to see him working on something every day that intrigued him and filled him with such joy and purpose. And I think what I took away from it was that he would come in from the studio and just say that it was just such a wonderful thing to be working on somebody who every day he admired more, and to be able to infuse that and sort of put that into the wax was just a delight. And I think during this year, during the pandemic, what a wonderful thing to be able to do and to create, and to tell the story of history and Rhode Island's history, which many of you, I'm sure, might know that I care a lot about. And so it was great.
well, that kind of ties into another question I actually have here. Is it common, do you think, for most sculptors to do this kind of like extensive research on their subject? Is it more based on just your general interest, or?
I really, the most important thing for me, more than a photographic representation or a photorealistic one, is to get a presence of the person involved, more of a feeling for them, almost an impression. So what they look like is important to get the confidence and the framework, but it almost feels more important to know what they felt like, what they might have thought of, what they did, and try to capture that in the material. I think artists all do research in different ways. You really, when you don't have many images to go on for someone like Bannister, you kind of have to do a bunch of research just to get your footing on what you're going to do. So I would assume that most sculptors who do any kind of portrait work do a lot of research. If they don't have someone living to sit there and pose for them, that would be a piece of cake.
Okay, well, I have actually a question now for your wife again. So what is your field of work, and what kind of research have you done on the Bannisters in particular? And is that accessible to us somewhere where we can take a look?
Sure. So I'm the executive director of the Rhode Island Historical Society.
Cool.
And I specialize in 20th century African American history, as when I was in academia. And so for me, it's more of a hobby. She is Christiana in particular. Also, though I go by Morgan, my first name is Christiana, so I've always felt a real affinity with her. And is around usually talking about her in the context of the Bannister house. So most of the work I've done has been talking about her, and hopefully I'll be talking about her during Women's History Month coming up in a couple of weeks, and you can see that on TV.
Yeah, and Morgan, if you have any links you'd like to share with us, we can probably put them in the chat for everybody to see. That would be wonderful. Just anything on that. Let me see if we have any other questions here. I have one more. Let me take a look. So actually kind of a studio question. Maybe you addressed this earlier, Gage, but what studio temperature affects the wax that you're working on? Is there a certain, does it need to be cold or hot?
It is my demon. Temperature in my studio is my demon.
Okay.
Basically, with the wax I use, as you saw in the video, when it is above 77 degrees, it liquefies. When it is below 70 degrees, it turns very solid. So in the winter, it is a giant piece of dark chocolate, which is very hard to work and requires heat lamps and keeping the heat up. But in the summer, my studio gets to be well over 90 degrees. So some mornings I would walk in there, and if the first iteration of my armature didn't have like 80 shoulder pads inside to hold the weight of the shoulders. So I came in there and his head was at the top of the armature and everything else had slumped down like a birthday kid down onto the table. And most of the work I did was during the summer in the heat with very inefficient air conditioning. And it was just like working with pudding. It was terrifying. So I had a lot of false starts because of the heat. But still, I mean, it's worth working with material. But yes, heat especially is very difficult in my studio.
So since you brought up chocolate, have you ever worked in chocolate?
Not yet. You see, I don't want to eat the wax. So that might be problematic working in candy.
So do we get to know what your next project might be? Is there like something that it might be, or a hint at it, or are you totally happy with giving it away if there is something?
Well, I mean,
You just finished the table.
you mean my future project, something I want to be working on?
Is there something like you're thinking about working on, or that you are, or?
I got a few things I'm thinking about, but most present is a life-size statue of Edward Bannister, hopefully. I would love to do that to give to Providence.
That would be awesome.
So that he could have his presence outdoors as well as where he is so welcomed and loved at the art club, but also bring that out into the city itself and start finding some wonderful, talented, powerful, and diverse historical figures for the city.
Wonderful. Okay, are there any more questions? Let me see. All right, let's see here. So do you feel like you have more control with this particular material versus other, like, sculpting?
I do. It takes a lot of, wax takes a lot of practice.
Right.
But once you get it, there's just so much freedom with what you can do. I'm very painterly in the way I sculpt. So being able to have it very, very flowing, very soft, and then being able to get nice and rigid with it. I mean, you could do anything. Clay never appealed to me because there's so much dust and it feels so gritty. And it dries out, it cracks, so much weight involved. It doesn't kind of hold itself together. And I just, when I could stop using it out of college, I did. And after that, I did a lot of work with welding steel. And I loved steel because a very little bit could hold a lot of weight. You could grind it, hammer it, like the wax, you could melt it, rework it. and I love that, but it is really, really labor intensive and expensive. So wax is kind of, it was my catch-all that did everything I wanted, and is a joy to work with and a challenge, but that's the fun part.
Okay. All right. Are there any more? Oh, I do have a question. So where did you study sculpture?
I got my undergrad at Boston University.
Okay. Wonderful. Any other questions, everyone? Okay, well, if no one else has any more questions, I am going to turn this over to President Nancy Thomas, and I'll let her take over.
Thank you, Elise. It looks as though there were a couple other comments here. I might want to, many members may remember the life-size sculpture of H.P. Lovecraft that sat in the archway of Pack. Gage produced that as well.
Yes, I did.
That was very impressive, very impressive.
Thank you.
And then I see that Sherry asked a question. Compared to plasticine, does it allow you significantly more control?
With practice. With practice, it does.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, this has been really informative. It's been really wonderful to have you. And I see that we are now we're getting to the 7 o'clock hour. So I would really like to thank the staff, number one, under the leadership of our fearless leader, Seb Borges, our GM. In particular, I want to thank Kathy Hodge and Julia Hubbard for producing this wonderful production. I also want to thank Chef Scott. I hope you have all had an opportunity to have the wonderful meal that he created for all of us. I'd like to thank all the speakers this evening, with a special thank you to sculptor Gage Prentice for being here, and his wife for being here with us this evening. It was inspiring to hear about your process in creating such an amazing sculpture. I mean, it's just
Thank you very much.
truly inspiring. And last, certainly not least, a warm thank you to our anonymous donor for this amazing gift to the Providence Art Club. And now, everyone, I hope you have your cocktails ready. I do. I've had it ready for quite some time. And so I'd like to make a toast. Let's raise our glasses to the founders of this historic gem on Thomas Street, the Providence Art Club. Cheers, everybody.
You're here.
Cheers.
And I hope that you'll all stop in to see Mr. Bannister. He is in the founder's room. He's bigger than life. It's just amazing to see him. And thank you for all attending. And good night. Have a nice evening and a great weekend.
Take care. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.
Right.